reserving time at the end of the presentation for Q&A, so we encourage you to enter your questions in the side panel throughout the presentation, and we'll get to them at the end. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Brian.
Thanks, Christina. I appreciate it. So yes, ISV ecosystems. I don't think there's anything around silver bullets, honestly, when it comes to business, but this may be the closest that we can find with it, and thrilled to be able to do this with Sean, and thank you, Insight Venture Partners, for inviting us to this. Today, we're going to discuss both the value and the challenges of rolling out an ecosystem, specifically focused around ISVs participating in the ecosystem, and really looking at it from the SaaS perspective. So not from a mobile device perspective or a desktop operating system, but a SaaS ecosystem made up of ISVs. Our agenda is covering why and going through some common definitions, and not knowing fully who's with us today in the audience. Some of this may be knowledge that you already have. Some of this may be brand new. So please have patience as we work through that section, just to make sure that we're all using the same definitions, vernacular around an ecosystem and its value. Sean's going to talk through some of the go-to-market strategies and challenges around roles and approaches, and making sure that your organization's ready for it. And I'm going to finish with looking at, from a technology perspective, of how we can ensure that our technologies, our platforms, are actually capable of supporting an ecosystem. I hope today that you leave with better understanding around what ecosystems are, the value for the organization, and honestly, I hope that it stimulates conversations within your organizations with your board on areas that you can invest to create some defensibility for your organization. So I am Brian Walsh, CEO here at CodeScience. Sean, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I run all licensing for a firm called Nintex, based out of Bellevue, Washington. We do a lot of partnerships with other technology firms, and I lead the team that drives that initiative.
And I think your experience goes even deeper with some of your past employers.
Yeah, I used to work for a little startup called Salesforce.com, and did that for about 4.5 years, and had the privilege of working with about 70 different ISV partners who were launching applications within that ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sean. CodeScience works closely actually with quite a few members of the ISV, the Insight Venture Partners portfolio. We've been working for the past 10 years helping build out ecosystems, much of that with Salesforce, where we built over 175 products. But also over the past 1.5 years, also expanding to ServiceNow, and most recently on the Twilio side. We're the only recognized master PDO or product development outsourcer within the Salesforce ecosystem. And this is our bread and butter, is working on both sides of representing those that are the system of record, system engagement, as well as those that are looking to play in multiple ecosystems. Our client success list, I don't think you can do any webinar without having some sort of like logo porn. Really proud of this small selection of these ISVs and SaaS companies, many of which are in the process of IPOing or have already IPO'd or are doing acquisitions, and everything from small companies like Infinity all the way up through Accenture and Salesforce, and many other large enterprise companies like Optum. So why ecosystems? Why are these important? Why do we think this is the most defensible? So we should start with, who do we think that ecosystems are most appropriate for? And the knowledge that an ecosystem, to actually host your own ecosystem, is probably not for every company out there. And that to have an ecosystem that builds around your product really looks at two main areas today, which is systems of record and systems of engagement. And then in the future, we're starting to move to systems of intelligence and systems of automation. If you're not one of these, if you're not within that CRM or ERP category, there's opportunities for you to actually work within multiple ecosystems and participate to see many of the same value that the actual host gets. So what is a system of record, just so that we all have the same vernacular here? Within the SaaS world, we look at this as sort of the bottom of the stack system for our business. It starts with a database and then works up through the application stack. We see that within business and traditionally as three major areas around three major portions for a business: the customers, which is our CRM, our employees, which are HCM, and the assets, finances and physical and inventory, which is our ERP. As we've moved to a very digital world, many other systems of records have started appearing for all the different types of process or transactions that can take place. So big of late has been documents with IPOs that have occurred there, and with Box and Dropbox, OpenText being a legacy enterprise player, Google Drive coming in, contracts with DocuSign and Congo and Spring CM, even code. Most recently, the huge acquisition, I think $7.3 billion for GitHub, looking at Bamboo, SVN, all the different pieces. So these are our database. This is the ultimate record. This is where we go back to find out truth, where the truth and the actual is. A system of engagement is a layer that says, where do we as humans spend the most time? They've existed for such a long time, right? If we go back to terminals and mainframes, the system of engagement would really be your terminal. When you look at it as the PC war, and then Microsoft having that in our LANs and WANs and the PCs. If we looked at the 90s, the browser starting to be the system of engagement where we live. In modern times, it's become even more, there have been more and more systems of engagement. So Slack, even though it's down today, boy, what a recognition of the system of engagement that it provides for everyone, as we realize we don't know where to go to communicate with anyone, to get our integrations with different platforms, mobile devices and iOS and Android, TV, voice, browsers, they're all systems of engagement where that holds our attention as we try to access many other different products and services and communication channels. Important in business to actually build a moat. So obviously, once we've found our product market fit, we've found our pricing, our go-to-market strategy, it is incredibly important to start building moats around our business as early as possible to ensure that the next competitor cannot come replace us. We're challenging already a legacy player that's in the market, for them not to pivot and take you on, that you have a moat that you've built around your business. Traditionally speaking, we have, economies of scale, large players. We look at Amazon, incredible economies of scale and what they're able to do within shopping. Deep tech IP that really set us apart. We're probably seeing that within AI still, that we have such deep tech and IP that's a moat for the time being, until that becomes a bit more commoditized. Trade secrets were always a big portion of that, though perhaps a little bit less prevalent today. Network effects, such an amazing piece of watching the rise of LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of those platforms, where their networks effects of spreading their platform, so viral spread of it, but also in the defensibility of that graph that they own. So moats are incredibly important to business. If you listen to Charlie Munger and you listen to the investment world, those moats really drive investment. They look for that early on to protect your business. And I think this is incredibly important as we look at SaaS, because one could argue that SaaS is really just databases in the cloud. And it's easy if you have an API to move from one database to the next. You need more than just that database in the cloud. More important probably than just having a moat. Obviously having a moat is incredibly important, but more than that is to build more and more moats. And if you can design it where they actually feed each other, where as in one moat gets deeper, it actually starts feeding the next moat, and you have multiple layers that any competitor will have to get through. And if we can find a way to make that a cycle, and this virtuous cycle, they can almost become impenetrable and hard to overcome. So if we look at the CRM space, what's really the difference between Salesforce, which at this point is sort of running away with that CRM space in the cloud? I think they're over 30% market share and growing faster than they ever have before. What separates them from free players like Sugar CRM, which is an open source player? HubSpot gives away the SFA and CRM piece for free for their SMB of marketing automation, and yet Salesforce is still the dominant player within SMB. Microsoft Dynamics has great technology stack and technology that they bring to bear and all the customer relationships. So what's a huge differentiator between that? Slack, as we mentioned earlier, HipChat is so similar. Teams is so similar to Slack. So what is that differentiation between the platforms? One could argue it's user experience, but we can modify user experience. What makes that defensible then? Code, the monster acquisition. GitLab is essentially an open source version of GitHub that's available for free. There's hosted versions that are available for the fraction of the cost. Bitbucket is integrated so seamlessly with some of the most prevalent developer tools around Jira and Confluence. So what really separates GitHub and has given it that valuation and made it defensible, made Microsoft take a huge bet on it? And we would argue, and why we're all here today in the webinar, that the big difference between these market leaders and the others is really the ecosystems that they've built around them. Now, there are ecosystems for many of them take multiple layers where you have SIs, so your system integration consultants, as well as your ISVs. And we don't want to take away from the fact that an SI ecosystem is incredibly important in enterprise software. In fact, it's a requirement for it. We do an annual report called the State of the App Exchange Report. And we found that on average, any App Exchange partner had at least 5 SI partners, and the most successful, those that are growing greater than 50% year on year continually, could have upwards of 80 SIs. So we don't want to take away from that fact, but we want to focus really on our ISV ecosystem, as we believe that that has the most virtuous cycle of building multiple layers of defensibility around your business. And then also selfishly, that's the business that both Sean and I are in, is focusing on ISV. So I think our domain knowledge is on that ISV side. So why an ecosystem? Why is it important? And I think there's 5 major characteristics of having your own ecosystem for other ISVs to build upon that can really justify the expense and the time and the effort that it will take to build it out. And the first we look at would be total cost of ownership. As providers of products, we have to think about not only the cost of our license, but what does it take to implement it and the change management to learn the product and get an organization going on. So we look at enterprise, that can be a significant portion of the total cost of ownership. If our consultants are forced to create customizations and solutions to fill in functional gaps of our product, then that raises the total cost of ownership over and over. So I'll use some generic, easy to think about examples as we walk through this webinar. But if I'm in Salesforce and I force every single time that somebody wants to create a NDA and merge that together with data from my CRM, if I want to create a SAL to go out, if I want to create a master services agreement, that I have to engage an SI to create that, then my total cost of ownership has gone through the roof. And anytime I want to change that document, I have to go back to the consultants to do it. So by providing an ISV ecosystem, we can actually lower the total cost of ownership because that will lower the engagement. Professional services is generally speaking going to be more expensive than a product. And by using something that can sell me in a license on an ongoing basis, that's generally going to be cheaper than an SI coming in. So I can go to a Nintex DocGen at a much cheaper process than going to consultants over and over. So that's a win for the customer, and that's a win for you as the host of this ecosystem, that you can lower the total cost of that. From the standpoint of attrition, we look at some of the stats throughout all of the different ecosystems that have really been built, whether it's on the mobile, iOS and Play, whether it's within SaaS, operating systems, etc., and that even installing a single app can greatly reduce your attrition. And there have been studies that have shown that installing 5 or more apps can look to lower attrition greater than 80 to 90%. That's an amazing stat when it comes to subscription software, right? Churn is probably the #1 driver of lifetime value, and that's where the money is within SaaS. So our ability to lower attrition is key for our success. And we see that, and probably the reason that that happens is we move from just being a database where we store records, where we catch someone's attention, to actually being where business process takes place. And anyone that's worked with an enterprise IT knows that you spend a tremendous amount of time working with software that you have no idea how it got into the enterprise, where the people that put it in place 10 years later, 15 years later, say, I don't even know who hired this, who wrote the code. It's here. We're not going to touch it. Just leave it be in place. So getting into being the business process for business is gigantic for being able to lower attrition, to provide more services for our end users and customers. Follow that through, though, is defensibility. If the products that are built on top of you don't exist on your competitors, well, people will have a hard time leaving you for that competitor, right? It adds to that total cost of ownership. They've got to actually go, if I have on Salesforce my electronic signature, my document generation and project management software, and I try to leave to go to Sugar CRM or a different CRM, and those products don't exist, well, I may not go because of the cost of changing platforms. That there's a huge barrier for me, and that makes it much more defensible for me. So I'm no longer that database in the sky. There are many other business processes and relationships that have to exist for me to go. Next one is often forgotten, but it's actually capital efficiency, which is we estimate just on the Salesforce side that over $1 billion a year is spent on building on Force.com, the underlying platform for Salesforce, and that isn't spent by Salesforce. That's by the ecosystem actually building innovation and products on top of it and taking that to market. So Salesforce is actually able to repurpose all of that money that they may have to spend and put that back into sales and marketing. So they're building a stronger business. They're getting more market share. That's driving a little bit of a network effect then around getting more ISVs in to want to build and take advantage of that network, that their market share as well. So that capital efficiency is key in the long run. It doesn't happen in the short run. There's a big investment for your system of record and system of engagement in the early stage, but after a while that actually starts to be offset. And then in the longer term, if you set it up where you're looking to actually generate revenue from your ecosystem, you look at the rake that is in place for the Apple Store and and for the Android Store, they're seeing significant revenue. Salesforce sees significant revenue come. It didn't happen early on, but as they actually built out those ecosystems, it went forth. And the last one I think is really interesting is around specialization. As SaaS companies, there's only so deep we can go with all of the features that we have to build out. And we're unable to actually fill every single gap in our feature set. So as we look at, I'm going to use Salesforce as an example again, as they look at healthcare and they have Health Cloud, they can't go to the depth that Optum or Genea or Cerner can go when it comes to healthcare records. They have Financial Services Cloud, but they can't go to the depth that Encino or Finergo go when it comes to understanding client lifecycle management and how a bank actually operates and the data model that it takes. And so Salesforce is able to actually still work with all of those clients, but have this partner ecosystem that can provide that extreme specialization. And finally, why do we ever do something in business, especially as startups, is to increase value. And so as we look at lowering our churn, that's going to increase our lifetime value. As our lifetime value increases, so can our cost of customer acquisition. So we're more likely to go upstream. We're more likely to spend larger sums to acquire larger customers. These are more moats for our business and creates greater defensibility. So really in a successful ecosystem, it drives so much around the product that you're able to offer for your customers, the cost that it takes to deliver that, as well as the end value for your organization. Sean, I think you're going to lead us through a bit in talking about some of the go-to-market strategies. I'm going to pop over and give you screen control so you can move through your slides.
Great, thanks, Brian. And great overview for context for the audience. Thank you. Just to put things in context, I work at a firm called Nintex. Nintex is in the workflow automation space. We have three pillars of technology that we consider core. First is workflow automation, second is document generation, and third is forms. Those three things working together are the foundation of the moats we've created from an ecosystem standpoint. The firms traditionally sold into the Microsoft ecosystem. They made an acquisition about 3 years ago almost of a company called DrawLoop, which was on the Salesforce ecosystem. So culturally, we've are very much focused on those two main ecosystems and driving scale for the business. When I joined the firm about 2.5 years ago, they asked me to come over and help them figure out their Salesforce strategy after their acquisition and work within a very much channel-centric environment and company. So for context, we have roughly 1,700 SI partners. Most of those are on the Microsoft side, but now high number of those are on the Salesforce side, where we invest heavily in a go-to-market overlay strategy. What I tried to bring to the firm is a strategy around pulling in other ISVs, i.e. creating a platform within a platform motion where ISVs could take our technology and leverage it in their applications to make it better and stronger, because our tech is really hard to do exceptionally well. And as you go up enterprise and sell into harder, more challenging environments, we're focused on helping firms fill really tough gaps around our discipline and wrap that around what they're doing in their core area. So with that kind of quick background, let me see, Brian, if we can get my mouse to move forward. There we go. Hit it too many times. Okay. There's really three business strategies that everybody on the call can think about. It's not going to apply to everybody. That's why I kind of in prep for the call broke it down into three areas. First is, we'll start with the build side. That's what Salesforce and now ServiceNow is doing a really good job of. They're creating a platform to build on top of. Some of the firms may have done that. Two examples, Nintex has done that, DocuSign on the slide, as firms that have built on top of Salesforce to create a solution. Kind of second strategy is sell side. So what I just referenced, I created a team to take our technology and provide it in a royalty based motion to other ISVs who wanted to extend their offering. And that brings us to the third example, which is extensions. You can think of that as OEMing, you can think of that as reselling, but basically firms like DocuSign, ServiceMax, et cetera, they're building programs to extend their platform, and they're putting teams in place to work with sell-side ISVs to make their whole story stronger. So those are really the three main categories that are out there. For this talk, just keeping things simple, I'll focus on what you need to look at from a sell-side standpoint and the team you want to build around it. You can do a freemium offer, or you can do a referral agreement, or you can do a reseller. Those are the typical three motions that people contemplate. We offer all three to our partners because we want the partners to pick what's best for them and help them build their businesses over time. So we have three different programs where they can work within that environment. You might pick two, you might pick one. All are fine. Just kind of think through what you want to offer and why you want to offer it as a firm. The main thing to kind of get your mind around, or advice I can offer, is if you want to go into one of the three main build side, sell side, or extension, you need a team. It's not a side project, and you need to start that investment once you make the decision that that's the strategy you want to head into. One way to think about putting the team together is, one, you need people to recruit and manage partners that you're going to bring on. So that's pretty obvious and simple. But it gets a little more complicated when you have to think through, okay, how are we going to sell this and sell through partner? What marketing plans, if any, are we going to put together? How are we going to make changes to comp for our people? How is that going to line up to support the partner's sales team, et cetera? Those are Those are real business processes, tactics, and strategies that you have to think through to really make this resonate both internally as well as externally to partners. You have to also think about distribution and support and get those models in place before you start going and recruiting and manage. Those will be some of the first questions that come up in a sales cycle. And then finally, you have to start to think about, what do I need to do to my product? So you have to pull in product management, you have to pull in R&D. We actually hired Brian's team to help us assess how we were going to make our DocGen product available for third parties to consume and use. And we had to think through support, distribution, as well as product changes to make that program available and ready for that consumption. So that's not a trivial effort. You need somebody helping you drive that initiative as well. And then finally, you're going to come to a decision point of which partners do you onboard, which ones are deserving of kind of a strategic marketing plan moving forward. Those are really simple to identify. They're ones that you think are going to generate a significant amount of revenue for you over others that will use your tech, leverage it in their market, but they may not need your help, or they may need your help depending on what you work out from an agreement standpoint. What is nonstop in this motion is enablement. And enablement is both internal to teams as well as external through partners. So you have to be ready to invest in team and people to drive that motion. Otherwise, things will fall flat as you try to get things launched. Let's see. So here's a great Moat example that I put together just as a talking point to hopefully spark some ideas and conversation. So if we look at the build side, we talked about Salesforce. Both DocuSign and Nintex decided to create apps on that app exchange. We then decided consciously to create a sell-side motion. DocuSign decided to pick up our technology and put it into their extension program and resell it into the market to solve certain DocGen and certain workflow gaps. And to kind of bring that to life, last week, DocuSign had their customer event, which we participated in, and they launched what they called a system of agreement. System of agreement for them is very well articulated. Every company has a current system of agreement, and DocuSign's in the business of trying to make that better for their customers. And they wrapped that theme around what they call 4 main verbs. So there's a prepare, that's typically DocGen and creating a document that's getting ready for signature. There's the signing event that DocuSign does exceptionally well, and most folks on the phone are aware of. There's the act verb, which is what happens after the signing event. How do I orchestrate workflows, for example, and meet my KPIs in my business relationships that I've just signed up for? And finally, there's manage. How do I get AI into my contracting process? What have I signed up for? How do I manage those agreements moving forward? So that was their entree and vision of what they're trying to point their whole firm and company around. And it was an impressive display of a vision. And one of the reasons it was impressive is they pulled in partners, right? They made it very clear that they're not going to do everything within that broad category of system of agreement. They're going to bring in SI partners, they're going to bring in other technology partners, and they're going to bring in finally what they called extension partnerships. And we were showcased, Nintex was showcased in the ACT verb at their event last week. And what we tried to make clear to both customer SI partners and DocuSign employees is where the gaps were that each party was filling. So here, represented on the gray, is what's core to DocuSign, and the blue is what Nintex is taking on to add value to that, what we call a combined solution partnership. It's a really nice way to think about how 3 different parties, in this case Salesforce, DocuSign, and Nintex, are trying to create a moat strategy in each one of those categories: build, sell side, and extension for context. So with that, you can't really do that stuff without not only assessing your business strategy, but you also have to assess your technology, and is it capable for other partners to start to want to bank on you as a supplier to help them fill key gaps. So with that, Brian, why don't I hand it back to you to kind of walk us through that process and assessment.
Thanks, Sean. I love the idea, though, if you went back 2 slides where you talked about enablement is a motion that happens constantly, but it's not just external enablement, that you need to actually focus internally as well to enable your existing teams, both on the sales and product side.
Yep, that's a non-going process, and you got to invest in that accordingly.
Perfect. In 2008, Mark Andreessen was on the board of Ning, and Ning was in sort of a head-to-head battle with Facebook, and he started doing a lot of writing on his blog about network effects that were going on. This is prior to Facebook having IPO'd, obviously, and Ning was starting to launch their own platform. So Ning, for those who don't remember, was a platform for creating social networks. And he wrote this blog piece really looking at platforms and starting to categorize them. And this shaped a lot of thought for me. This is back in 2008, around understanding platforms themselves, their purpose, levels of engagement that we have around those. And really, platforms are the places where we can run code, places where we can interact. And he defined sort of 3 generic categories. And amazingly enough, I think that they still exist and hold true today. I think as we start looking forward to our systems of intelligence, systems of automation, there may be more granularity that's required. But diving into where we are today for system of record and system of engagement, the first level, and that level 1, is one that actually does not have a huge cost overhead to actually start creating, and that's around APIs. This is not considered a human level of interaction. So this interaction isn't providing me UI elements. I'm not interacting from a UX perspective with another system. It's fully based off of APIs. And there are thousands and thousands of companies that can operate within this space. And so we can have API integrations. As we started expanding the types of APIs that are out there, we look at webhooks, we look at streaming APIs, we can make them even more real time. When we're looking at a SOAP or a REST-based API, that's a polling basis. As we start getting into looking at webhooks, as we look at streaming APIs, we can start almost considering that as having human interaction at UX. So for instance, I could, through the streaming API, have it call out to another system or through a webhook, and then get a response back and take action. So I may not have a user interface to it, but I could be affecting data. I could see a file get stored somewhere and know that that had happened. But it is a very small amount of interaction for the system. And I would argue that from an API perspective, that actually enhances the ability for someone to leave your platform as well. So there's great advantages in having that API, but it also means that we can migrate from one platform to another. So are there tremendous differences in different paying processors? Can I just move from one to the other if the APIs are equivalent to each other? So level 2 starts to come in, which actually provides a bit more value to everybody involved. So first really started seeing this around the first Facebook platform that came on. We see this with Iframes that come in. Salesforce has a version of this called Canvas. We'll see this on a lot of different platforms that come in, where there is a structured environment, a frame where the ISV can have placement within the system of record, the system of engagement. This starts to provide some security concerns as we look at it. So as you as the host have to be able to handle some of those. If you have an iframe, you have much more security concerns than perhaps just framing and doing a proxy. So if we look at, for instance, how HubSpot has integrated, I think this is a fairly common model as we look at this frame. On the left-hand side, we can see there is a widget or a component that sits within the HubSpot marketing automation. That's made up through actually calls to an ISV and formatted back. So we get better value for our end customer when we have UI components that can come. So as I'm sitting within my system of integration or system of record or my system of engagement, I can actually see many times in real time data and activity that's actually occurring from this separate product, and that can add value to it. But there's still limitations to this, and the part that the call out for us is that as an ISV, I have a really limited amount of functionality that I can provide to end users. And recall that as a marketplace, we're looking to create value for sort of everybody involved. It's not just creating value for HubSpot, it's also creating value for that ISV, because the ISV has to invest in building this integration. And the ISV is going to choose from many different systems of record, systems of engagement that they can invest in. And so the more functionality that they can provide, the more innovation that they can do, the better relationship and experience they have with their end customer, which is also HubSpot's end customer, the more likely they are to invest, more likely they are to focus on this platform as part of their go-to-market strategy. And so I think this is a good step as a level 2 platform to get there, but it still doesn't provide the ultimate value for us. And as we look at the next level, which is level 3, this is sort of our ultimate level, where we have a SaaS platform that is capable of running not only data, but also providing custom front-end UI, where an ISV can build out their own engagement, their own user experience, their own user interface within that SaaS product, that they have access to the data and they can write to it and update it and delete it. They can interact with that system of record, the system of engagement. And lastly, that it's an environment for code to run. And so you can upload code and host that code and run it. And this level 3, I think, is still one of the most challenging things that we have within the SaaS ecosystem. And there's very few that have actually pulled this off at scale. So obviously we've referenced Salesforce multiple times being able to do this. And while they have their own language that they've been running and managing around Apex and Visualforce and now Lightning and Lightning components, it is a contained environment that allows ISVs of any sort and flavor to come and create incredibly engaging and innovative solutions within Salesforce. ServiceNow is on that same path and is providing that platform for people. Twilio is very close to being at that same level. They have a serverless infrastructure for hosting code. They have a brand new UI environment that they've been talking about. I mean, I think they're close to launching that's called Flex. That'll allow you to create UIs around telecom, around voice, around video sharing. And the requirements around it, I think, are where it gets very difficult. And this is the part to look at as you're looking at your SaaS platform. If you're built on ServiceNow or you're built on Salesforce, you already have all of this underlying infrastructure, and you can start taking advantage of it immediately to start building out your own ecosystem. You know, Sean talked about it from Nintex's standpoint, about both participating in it and then working with other ISVs. DocuSign doing the same thing, built on Salesforce and leveraging this huge stack. We're seeing that now with the ServiceNow stack as well. If you're not in that place and you're a standalone infrastructure, you're built on AWS, Azure, etc., thinking through the requirements that you need to go through to get there will help you guide your path to get to that level 3. You shouldn't wait to be at level 3 to begin your ecosystem, right? We can begin at that level 1 with the API integrations. We can start introducing Canvas and Frames to get there. But as you start going, we really think of this around how do you provide constraints around third parties uploading code to your servers to run. So what if they have a runaway process? So they're calling the database too often. How are developer environments and sandboxes for your customers? What are the security concerns that we have to put in place? So lots and lots of requirements for you if you were to consider running your own SaaS application and provide this as a level 3 platform. Again, you can do this we're already on the Salesforce and ServiceNow platform, and they're eager for you to begin that process. But if you are on that standalone side, this is sort of a roadmap for you to start putting in place and considering for you. So we are coming up on the end of the piece. I think as a summary on this, we look at ISV ecosystems as one of the more defensible strategies you can put in place for your business, that it can lower the total cost of ownership for your customers, that it can lower attrition, which will increase your lifetime value. It makes your platform incredibly defensible against other existing players, incumbents, as well as incoming players that will be happening in the future. If you're successful, of course, you're going to have challengers. It's a much more capital efficient process for you to build out your entire product suite. It allows you to bring in specialists within the different areas that you want to grow into. And finally, and probably most important, can be a great driver of value for your organization as you look for future funding or exits and entering into the capital market and public markets. With that, come to the very end. I know that we're collecting questions from the audience. So Christine, did we have any questions pulled in from people that we can answer for people today?
We do. So the first question is, what ARR can you start building for an ecosystem?
Well, I'm glad we're starting with the easy ones. What ARR? That's a great question. I think, product market fit is going to be important. I don't think there's a perfect formula on ARR that says, hey, once you hit 10 million ARR, because that can mean something different for everyone. I think establishing product market fit is important. And so that can happen at all different levels of ARR, but you're going to have a sizable enough base for others to actually invest in building on top of you. So imagining that you could do it when you have 10 customers or 20 customers may be difficult to imagine. That being said, if you're target market where the Fortune 10 and you had all 10 of them, that may be a very interesting place for people to do it. I think what is incredibly important is as you approach that product market fit is starting to think about the levels of platform that you can develop and building those competencies in there. So that is going to hit every level of your system, from customer success, product management, development, engineering, all of those different areas for us of building out a platform that's going to be capable of supporting an ecosystem. And Sean, there's probably thoughts around as well, like how early you need to build out your go-to-market team to support that, and how quickly you need to grow that team.
Yeah, some key indicators for you to be aware of is how are you doing with your deployments? Are they consistent, right? If you're doing professional services or you're working through a partner, are those deployments going as expected, or are you not keeping your level of budget that you laid out with your client? Are you going beyond what you thought you were doing? Those are indicators that your core offering, as well as kind of maybe some checkbox features that aren't deep enough, or you might want to start the process of exploring other types of firms to help you solve those problems. But that's probably a good starting point to start thinking through when to make the jump. And we've got firms we're working with, they only have 150 clients, but to Brian's point, those clients are very large enterprise customers. We have firms that have 400,000 customers that we're working with and trying to help. So it just all depends where you are in your life cycle. Don't feel bad about starting out from ground zero. Everybody starts in some place, and it's all about building the company as opposed to worrying about where you're at today.
Sean, following on that train of thought, I think we both had just addressed that from the standpoint of building your ecosystem. What about participating in other ecosystems? Is there ever a time that it's too early to participate in the other ecosystems?
Yeah, if you're not ready to support it with a dedicated team to drive the results you're thinking about, I think it's a big challenge to just think, oh, I'll take my business that was successful in Microsoft and point it to Salesforce or ServiceNow. They're vastly different, beasts. They work differently. So you have to have teams and people who specialize in those areas. And if you're not willing to make that commitment, that's okay. But it's much easier to either focus a team in one area or two areas, but don't try to bite off too much that you're not willing to properly invest in would be advice there, Brian.
Yeah, I think the key there is that, none of these ecosystems are, if you build it, they will come. Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz had a blog post about participating in those ecosystems, and he's right that you have to be able to control your own destiny, and you have to be able to take this to market, and you can't have an expectation that they're just going to magically start selling you, because unfortunately you're one of could be thousands of SKUs that the salespeople are already selling. So Sean, you were spot on in saying that you have to have the resources to be able to take that to market.
Great, thanks guys. And next question, how do you manage the competitive tensions with partners?
Great question. You mean if we've got two partners in the same space that we're providing our technology to? Is that basically the question?
I would assume so.
I'm assuming it is. One of the things we do is we try to split the people that are on point. So we're not big enough as a team inside an Intex to have a team focused on FinServe, for example, where you would expect to find multiple partners in that space and might run into competitive tensions. But we do a lot of work with EFS systems like Box and Dropbox, and we intentionally put partner manager on Box versus Dropbox to make a clean separation both for us and the partner. I think that's a very important thing to look at and talk openly with your partners accordingly so that they feel comfortable as best they can. Conversely, we're dealing with, if you take the extensions model, the resell OEM piece, we're helping ServiceMax and DocuSign. There are other competitors in that space that we're competing against. And so we've asked those firms to help us draw a clear line of where we add value versus the other partner add value. And that's a very important thing as you focus on enablement. The DocuSign sellers or the ServiceMax sellers will want to know that. So you need to make that part of your plan. So it's really two sides of competitive tension that you need to be aware of on.
I would think I'd look at that question as well from a couple other angles, and we don't have a lot of detail on that question, but one is the competitive pressure of competing with your ecosystem. We as a SaaS product may want to go to a certain direction, and oh my gosh, our marketplace already provides that. There have been some spectacular missteps that companies have done. I think we can all point to even looking at Twitter and how Twitter engaged the developer ecosystem and challenged and went directly against some of the Twitter clients and did a mea culpa and then came back and shut things off. Like, it's been sort of back and forth that really burns a lot of people. I think there's an idea, number one, it has to come from the cultural value. If you value as an organization that yes, we believe in the marketplace and we believe that we coexist and we add to each other, then that should guide some of your decisions. And as leaders of our organizations, we need to make sure our entire teams buy into that culture and that idea. There are always going to be tensions, though, of what products, what features am I building and what features are my partners building. And I think I like to think of that product management decision sort of as the T of product management. Certain areas I need to go extremely deep, where I truly am the subject matter expert. I know everything about it. Salesforce can say that around Sales Cloud. Everything around sales, when it comes to how I handle and lead to an opportunity, activities around it, ownership, teams, collaboration, Salesforce can own that piece. But the associated areas, they actually do provide some thin pieces. So in the case with Sean's company, they provide visual force tags that you can actually generate PDFs to generate documents. But it's clunky. So they can do a check mark and say, yes, we provide this functionality. They can do that with sort of Word documents and such, but it's very limited in functionality. It does provide a really low-cost solution for people that need to go there, but they create a space for Nintex DocGen to say, hey, if you want incredible document generation. If you want to use some of the other great platforms out there like Conga, et cetera, that they can provide the functionality around how to create complex documents. And so if you just look at the marketing checkbox, yes, they compete with each other. But when you get down to the actual functionality they provide, I don't think they compete with each other, actually. I think it is a checkbox that you can use on an RFP to say, yes, we provide that out of the box, but here's a better angle if you need to actually invest in that. But I'll come back to saying that it is a cultural piece, that culturally your organization has to accept that the value of our ecosystem goes far beyond just the revenue we may be trading for direct licenses, that we are creating something defensible, we are creating something impenetrable on that.
Wonderful. And I think with that, we have all the questions answered, so we can let people go with 7 minutes. Thank you so much, you both. This was wonderful. Again, to everyone who's tuned in, we will be sharing the recording and the slides afterwards, so keep a lookout from an email from me, Christina. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.